The royal family has gathered in Scotland for their annual summer break at Balmoral. It marks a rare occasion that they're all together, but there's one high-profile absentee from this year's events.
Prince William made a decision that is quietly changing the future of the royal family. What began at Balmoral with an incident involving a child soon turned into a moment that forced Prince William to take one of the most deliberate and far-reaching actions of his life. Those closest to the monarchy say the consequences have been impossible to ignore, with some believing the institution has crossed a line from which there is no return. So what happened behind palace walls that led William to act? And why are insiders convinced the effects of that decision are still unfolding today? Join us as we uncover Prince William's shocking move, the place where it all started. Balmoral is not like anywhere else in the royal family's world. Every other royal residence comes with formality attached to it. Balmoral is different. The Scottish estate has been the royal family's private retreat for generations. It is the one place where they are supposed to be able to exhale, to step away from the weight of what their public roles demand, and to exist as a family in the way that ordinary families do, without cameras at the gate or courtiers managing every hour of the day. It is, as much as anywhere in their lives can be, simply home. The fact that what happened there, in that specific place, is one of the reasons it landed with the weight it did. If this had occurred at a public engagement or a formal event, the rules of that environment would have provided a framework for managing it. Balmoral has no such framework. What happens there is real in a way that scheduled royal duties never quite are. And when something goes wrong at Balmoral, it goes wrong in the rawest possible way. By all accounts, the day began the way those days usually begin at the estate. The family was gathered. The children were present. The rhythm of the place was doing what it always does, pulling people away from the tension of their public lives and into something that feels, at least on the surface, uncomplicated. George, Charlotte, and Louis were around, doing what children do in a setting with space and freedom and adults nearby, but not constantly watching. Young Prince Louis had wandered away from the main group the way children naturally do when they feel safe in a familiar environment. He was not far. He was simply in that particular childhood state of being slightly apart from the adults, absorbed in whatever a 7-year-old finds interesting on a Scottish estate on a summer afternoon. It was during that moment of ordinary childhood independence that Camilla's grandchild approached him. What followed was not the kind of thing that gets smoothed over as a misunderstanding or dismissed as children being children. According to people who were close enough to witness the exchange, the comments directed at Louis were deliberately cruel. They were not aimed only at him personally, they extended to his family. And according to accounts from that day, some of those comments specifically referenced Catherine and invoked the name of Princess Diana. Diana, Princess of Wales, and the woman who was torn apart by the very institution her son now stands at the center of. A woman whose name still carries enough emotional weight that invoking it, in any context involving William's children, is not a neutral act. For Louis, who is still young enough that the full weight of his family's history sits above him rather than around him, those words were weapons he had no way to deflect. He burst into tears and ran straight back to his mother. Now you might be wondering what Catherine did when her youngest child came back to her in tears, and what happened in the hours that followed. Because the way she responded to that moment was not what most people expected, and it set everything else into motion. Catherine's reaction and the conversation that changed everything. The moment Louis reached Catherine, something shifted in the atmosphere of that day that the people nearby noticed immediately and have not forgotten since. Catherine did not create a scene or become visibly distressed in the way that the situation would have justified. What she did instead was go completely still, and anyone who has ever watched someone hold themselves together in a moment of genuine hurt or genuine anger, choosing very deliberately what they are going to do rather than simply reacting to what was done, recognizes what that kind of stillness means. It is someone deciding, in real time, that the response to what just happened is going to be considered rather than immediate. The staff members nearby said the shift was tangible. There was something in her expression that made people around her uncomfortable, not because she appeared volatile or unpredictable, but because she clearly had no intention of letting this go. The composure that has become one of the most consistent and admired aspects of how she carries herself publicly was present, but underneath it was something harder and more determined than usual. The rest of the day passed. The family moved through it the way families move through difficult days, managing the surface while the harder conversation waits for a private moment. But Catherine's stillness did not soften as the hours went by. When that private moment finally came, when it was just William and Catherine and the day had wound down enough for them to talk honestly, she told him exactly what she was feeling. The way she framed it was not simply about what had happened to Louis, though that was where it started. She went further. She brought up Diana. She reminded William of something he already carries in his bones, but that has a different weight when someone he loves names it directly and plainly. The institution he was born into, the one he is being prepared to lead, has a history of failing to protect the people inside it from emotional harm, not always through deliberate cruelty, sometimes through indifference, sometimes through a commitment to maintaining a certain image at the expense of the actual human beings living under it. But the outcome was always the same. People who should have been protected were not. Diana experienced that failure in the most devastating and public way imaginable. William watched it happen as a child, and then watched its consequences play out across the years in ways that shaped everything he became. He did not need to be educated about any of this. He knows what institutional failure to protect looks like from the inside. He carries that knowledge with him every single day. What Catherine said to him was not about relitigating the past. It was about the choice sitting directly in front of him. She told him clearly that she was not going to allow history to repeat itself. She was not going to watch George, Charlotte, and Louis be drawn into the kind of emotional environment that had defined so much of William's own childhood. She was not going to let the patterns that had damaged his family once run unchallenged through the lives of her children. Insiders who have spoken about that conversation say that was the precise moment the shift happened. William stopped thinking about how to manage the situation quietly and started thinking about what he was actually going to do. And what he did the very next morning caught everyone inside the palace completely off guard. So what exactly did William put into motion, and how did he do it? The morning after, and what William put into motion. The next morning, Kensington Palace was operating in a mode that the people inside it described as unusually controlled and tightly coordinated. Senior aides were called into a closed-door meeting without advance notice. Communication within the palace was being managed more closely than normal. Legal advisors were brought in quietly, with no public signal that anything significant was being decided. From the outside, the day looked like any other. Inside, people understood something major was happening. William walked into that meeting carrying a briefing folder. What it contained, according to sources familiar with the situation, was a detailed and methodical breakdown of how Camilla's wider family's presence within royal life was going to be reduced, not adjusted slightly over time, not quietly discouraged through subtle social signals. Reduced in a way that was thorough, specific, and had clearly been thought through well before he walked into that room. Event invitations that had become routine were going to be reviewed. Balcony appearances, which are among the most visible symbols of proximity to the monarchy's public image, were on the table. Ceremonial roles, honorary participation, any form of official visibility, all of it was being examined with the clear intent to pull back what had been allowed to accumulate over time. Some staff members in that room began referring to what was happening among themselves as the eraser mandate, a phrase that captured the methodical and deliberate quality of what was being removed. What struck people most was not the scope of the decision, It was the manner in which William was carrying it out. There were no outbursts. There was no visible frustration leaking into the room. He was composed, focused, and precise in a way that communicated to everyone present that what was happening was not a reaction made in emotion. It was a decision made with full intention after careful thought. That matters more than it might initially seem. Decisions made in the heat of a difficult moment tend to fade. They get walked back over days or weeks as the emotion that produced them cools down and the pressure to maintain institutional harmony reasserts itself. Decisions made with this kind of composure and deliberate structure do not behave the same way. The people in that room understood that, and it was part of why the atmosphere was the way it was. What happened next was the part that genuinely caught people inside the institution off guard. Because in the royal family, there is a framework for how significant decisions are supposed to be made. You consult, you discuss, you bring in the relevant voices, and you work through the chain of authority before you act. That is not merely a formality. It is how the monarchy has maintained internal order across generations. William bypassed it entirely. He did not go to King Charles before putting his directive into motion. He acted first and then informed his father afterward in writing. The letter, by all accounts, was respectful in tone. Nobody who has heard about it has described it as aggressive or hostile, but the content made one thing unmistakably clear. Charles was being told what had already been decided, not consulted about whether it should happen. There was no request for feedback, no opening for reconsideration. It was a notification, not a proposal. For courtiers who have spent their careers operating within the established hierarchy of that institution, the sequence of events was genuinely startling. Not because William had done something publicly scandalous, but because of what it revealed about how he is beginning to operate. But if William bypassed the king to make this happen, how did Charles actually respond? And whose side did he take? Charles steps aside. Camilla's response to what William had put into motion was not quiet acceptance. Once she became aware of the directive and understood its full scope, insiders say the atmosphere inside the palace shifted again in a noticeably different direction. There were hurried exchanges between aides. There were closed-door conversations. There was a strong and clear sense that she was working to persuade Charles to step in and reverse what had been done. Her argument, as described by those familiar with the situation, had genuine institutional logic behind it. A decision of this significance should have required the full agreement of the king before it was carried out. The normal structure had been bypassed in a way that set a concerning precedent. If decisions of this kind could be made and implemented by the Prince of Wales without going through the proper chain, then questions about where authority actually sits within the institution become live and complicated in ways that create real problems going forward. That argument is not without merit on purely structural grounds. The monarchy functions on consensus and on the understood principle that significant internal decisions involve the appropriate levels of authority. When someone begins moving outside of that, even with entirely understandable motivations, it does create genuine questions about institutional order. But Charles did not push back. He chose not to overrule his son. He did not step in to reverse what had been done, despite the pressure and despite the argument that the normal structure had been ignored. When you look at the position Charles occupies right now, that decision makes a particular kind of sense, even if it was not what Camilla was hoping for. He has been managing his own health concerns with the visible grace and quiet courage that have earned him significant public warmth. He has spent years navigating the accumulated family tensions that culminated in the draining and public fallout with Harry and Meghan. He carries a weariness that goes beyond the physical, and the people close to him seem to understand and respect that. But beyond tiredness, Charles made a more calculated recognition of where things actually stand inside the monarchy right now. The center of gravity has been shifting for some time. William and Catherine have built something genuine with the public. Their approval is strong, their image is stable, and the emotional connection between them and the people who follow the royal family has been growing with a consistency that reflects real trust rather than novelty. Whatever presence Camilla's extended family had built up within royal circles over the preceding years, it had never been built on that kind of public foundation. So when Charles faced the choice between defending a structure that was quietly shifting anyway and supporting the direction his son was clearly moving in, he stepped aside. And that choice, quiet and undramatic as it was, sent its own message throughout the palace. Staff and courtiers began reading the situation and recalibrating accordingly. People who work inside royal institutions develop a particular sensitivity to where influence is concentrating and where it is draining away, and they began orienting themselves toward the Wales household in ways that had not been as visible before this moment. That kind of realignment is not merely symbolic. It affects access, communication, and the daily functioning of how decisions get made and information moves. When the people who operate an institution start adjusting who they align themselves with, it reflects a real internal shift, even when nothing has been formally changed or publicly announced. But here is the question that cuts to the heart of everything. Was any of this going to hold? Would William actually maintain the position he had taken? Or would the institutional pressure eventually lead to a quiet reversal that made the whole thing disappear? What happened next answered that question directly. The fallout and the name that changed everything. The result of all of this for Camilla's extended family was concrete and visible in a way that marked a clear departure from where things had stood just weeks earlier. Invitations that had become routine stopped arriving. Appearances that had felt natural and established were no longer on the schedule. The gradual and careful process by which they had been woven into the visible public image of the monarchy was being unwound with the same methodical quality with which it had been constructed. Some long-serving palace observers noted that the accumulation of that access had not been entirely uncontroversial even before this incident. There had been quiet conversation for some time about how frequently Camilla's relatives were appearing in royal settings, and about the way that frequency was beginning to blur the line between extended family and something that looked more like official participants in royal life. For certain members of the household staff who had been there long enough to have a clear sense of what that line was supposed to look like, the blurring had always felt like something that could become a problem eventually. Now it had. The timing of everything layered additional weight onto what was already a significant set of events, with Charles's health being a present and ongoing conversation, with the question of the monarchy's future direction becoming more immediate in public discourse. Every internal decision carried extra freight. People were already paying close attention to how William was positioning himself and what his priorities would look like when translated into actual institutional choices. This situation, triggered by something as specific as a child being cruel to another child at a family retreat, ended up revealing things about that in a way that no carefully managed public appearance could have. When word of what had happened and what William had done began filtering beyond palace walls, the public reaction was not what you might expect if you frame this purely as an internal royal family drama. People did not respond to it as gossip or institutional politics. They responded emotionally. And the reason came down to one name that kept surfacing in every conversation about the situation: Diana. Social media filled quickly with old footage and photographs of her. They were sharing it in direct response to what was being reported about Louis, about Catherine's quiet reaction, and about what William had chosen to do afterward. The connection they were drawing was clear and deeply felt. Here was a family that had once failed to protect one of the most beloved figures in modern British public life from emotional harm. And here was her son doing everything within his power to ensure that did not happen again with his own children. That framing did not feel like palace politics to the people receiving it. It felt personal. It connected to something that millions of people had been carrying for nearly 30 years. And yet, through all of that emotional public response, Not a single thing changed inside the institution in the direction of reversal. No quiet walkback happened. No compromise emerged. The directive held exactly as William had constructed it, which raises the most important question of all. What does the way he handled this tell us about the kind of king he is actually going to be? What William's response reveals about the king he is becoming. Through all of the public reaction and all of the internal pressure, William did not soften a single element of what he had put into motion. The directive held. Every decision from that closed-door meeting remained in place without adjustment or compromise. Nothing was walked back to ease the institutional friction or manage the optics of having bypassed the normal chain of authority. For people watching closely, that consistency communicated something important all on its own. It said that what they were observing was not a reaction produced by a stressful weekend that would fade as the emotional intensity of the moment passed. It was a position. William was holding it, and the hold was firm in a way that reflected something more durable than passing frustration. People who have followed his trajectory carefully across the years will tell you this did not arrive from nowhere. William has always operated with a particular combination of qualities that is less common than it might appear. In public, he is warm, accessible, and genuinely engaging in a way that makes people feel that what they bring to him actually reaches him. He does not perform empathy. He connects. That quality has been consistent across enough different kinds of public encounters that it does not read as a practiced skill. It reads as a genuine aspect of how he relates to people. But alongside that warmth, and not in contradiction with it, there is something considerably harder and more private. When something crosses a line for him, especially involving his children, his wife, or the specific set of emotional principles he has spent his adult life building around, the response that follows is not loud and temporary. It is quiet and permanent. He processes privately. He decides carefully. And then he acts in a way that holds regardless of what comes back at him from the institution around him. That combination is a significant asset for someone preparing to lead one of the world's most scrutinized institutions. The warmth means people trust him because he feels genuinely human and present. The firmness means the people working around him, and occasionally against him, understand that he is not someone who can be managed with appeals to tradition or hierarchy when he has already made up his mind about something that matters to him. Both of those things are going to be necessary for the kind of leadership the monarchy will require in the period ahead. And none of what William revealed about himself in this situation could be fully understood without understanding the person who helped him see it clearly in the first place. So what was Catherine's actual role in all of this? And why does it matter more than most people have given it credit for? Catherine, the shift in power, and what comes next. Catherine's role in everything that followed the incident at Balmoral deserves to be recognized properly and in full, because she was not simply the person who reported a grievance and then stepped back to let William handle it. The way she framed that private conversation showed a level of strategic clarity that went well beyond understandable maternal upset. She did not simply tell William that Louis had been hurt and that something needed to be done. She gave him a way of understanding what had happened that connected one specific incident to something far larger than itself. She drew the line between Louis's tears and the broader history of how the institution had failed to protect people it should have protected. She placed the choice in front of William, not as a reaction to one bad afternoon, but as a defining decision about what kind of father and what kind of future king he was going to be. That kind of framing, the ability to help someone understand the full weight of a moment without manipulating them or exaggerating the stakes, requires both a particular quality of mind and a particular quality of relationship. Catherine has spent years building a public reputation for being steady, thoughtful, and genuinely unflappable in situations that would have destabilized people with less internal grounding. That reputation gave her words in that private moment real weight. William already knew his children mattered. What Catherine helped him see was the specific shape of the choice in front of him, and why this particular moment required something different from the usual institutional management. As everything that happened settled into the wider conversation about the monarchy's direction, something else became visible that the incident itself had never been designed to reveal. The accumulation of what occurred, Camilla pushing back, Charles choosing not to intervene, staff beginning to recalibrate their positioning toward the Wales household, the directive holding firm without any reversal. Each of those things individually would have been worth noting. Together, they painted a picture of an institution in a genuine period of transition, even though the formal structure had not changed at all. What do you think this moment reveals about the kind of king William is going to be? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.